don't want to set the world.
Hey there everyone, Phantom here, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for clicking the video. This video is kind of an impromptu one, as I'm going through some personal issues, as well as the video I wanted to do this week is going to require a little bit more research, so that'll be the next video in 2 weeks. So I hope you guys like my little impromptu reading of the Let's Not Meet subreddit stories. As always, all the links are in the description below, and please go support the creators of the original stories by going and reading it yourself. If so, leave a comment and tell them I sent you. I hope you have a lovely day and enjoy the story time. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day, and I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with them. Of course, I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They'd let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. After all, you never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look at you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once he even told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he'd be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he had told me, and no one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-day shit. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered and handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize.
Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come into the station to talk about it.
I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had been stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight, and the detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene. So I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them of what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed by demons and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of the other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I wouldn't be alive today. So to the man that brutally murdered my friend and wanted to murder me, let's never meet again. This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like, I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor, and there was other stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up around 1 in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I woke up from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it. And a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection on my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off of the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later, steam was raising and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower, and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God for German quality work. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been a former person living in the flat, and was evicted after not paying rent. Seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into my new place. Edit. Since a lot of people ask, I found the knife later in the bathroom, so she definitely brought it with her. And either the police disarmed her, or she dropped it herself at any point. Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I give it to known local charities instead, or I could be sure that the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler though, he always sang opera music. Quite beautifully, all things considered. Even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips, I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money. and I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad, and he was probably about in his 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather or whatever. Nothing too deep. Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obligated to reciprocate with something at least superficially personal. He'd blurt out stuff like how he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, oh wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball. Not for a scholarship though. I'll see you around, okay? Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with the professor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over to say a quick hello and introduce my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by name. I explained our little friendship. He said the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured he was just being elitist, and I think he could tell I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject, just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in this city, or even give them money, because the chronically homeless, the ones on the streets enough that you could get to know them, tended to have criminal or addictive histories. I was surprised because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with Wendell's a victim of a post-capitalist society, and all the other things I'd learned in his very own class. But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. I kinda shook my head thinking, okay boomer, and if anything, felt fortified by that warning. Like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him. But the very next time I talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant, and I wasn't sure why. Until he said, "So your boyfriend, you two live together or what?" And I had no idea what he was thinking about. I said, "What boyfriend?" And he said, "The guy I met from yesterday, you were walking down the street with." And I laughed, explaining it wasn't my boyfriend, it was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden he wasn't irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him and he'd have a flower for me or a metal machine piece. I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flower once, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was also just being elitist and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, so he brought it up with me again a while later, saying that he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions and how he even almost went to college, but then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kinda made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said. Sparing the details, we did talk for like a half an hour and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use, and he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend overreacting to something he had done had derailed his life besides the drugs. So I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit and classes went virtual, so to save on rent I went home to my parents' house. Still in the state, but not near the campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background. And I thought, "Aw, I forgot all about him. I hope he's doing alright." And that was that. I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously, and I ignored it. but it kept coming back, so I decided to go and watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near the college. That freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It isn't that far from the college. It was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people, besides the normal, "can I buy you a meal" shtick. So I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them. Especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, "he definitely followed me because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me?" We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon, so I guess it doesn't really matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school who also ended up at my college called me and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you, like specifically you. He knew you were on club volleyball. He knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I just thought you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first because how would he know I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned that she'd probably been wearing a sweatshirt from our college, so I thought about it and decided he probably saw this sweatshirt, figured she might know me from college or something since we're both from this town, and was just trying to figure out how I was doing. I thought it was sweet, but also a little weird. He was a little weird, and that was part of his charm. I thanked her, but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyway. I decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I went back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at the time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but I was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been insisting that nothing was wrong, and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone that I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by the campus. I felt bad at potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother, in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I woke up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working or in school, he sleeps till noon, to the sound of my brother talking to the door. I got up to see what was going on because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit pretty hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned, he looked royally pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here," closed the door, despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and yelled, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was that the cops had come to arrest me for something. It's the only logical thought I could generate first thing in the morning. Only thing I can imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only used to get into concerts anyway, so I was really shocked. But my brother was still going, as best as I can remember, because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. This is so not cool. You didn't even ask? I wouldn't have said yes anyways, but you didn't even think to ask?" I realized that didn't align with being arrested, so I finally was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy, older, 45 maybe? Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus, Dad's gonna kill you. And then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom. And you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be social distance? You can go to a hotel because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him out of respect for you, but if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change. So I had no idea what he was talking about. None at all. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet because, you gotta remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise. Faint background noise. Compared to all the other stuff I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to mind. Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house. My brother looked ready to rip my face off. He said, "We're adults. Come on, don't fucking lie to me. I'm not mom and dad. We can't deal with this if you're gonna lie to my face." And I said I wasn't lying. I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I was genuinely serious. So now he was so confused and irritated as was I. And he was like, he didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used her name. He rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said yeah. He said you guys had a fight and he was here to work things out. Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach. Because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home. But I changed states. My brother moved to this state for school, and I don't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the people. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes for the first time since I'd known him. But sure as shit, it was Wendell, standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought this was my affirming that there was really some kind of secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known, so it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic, "what will grandma think" stuff. Finally, he realized I was tearing up and he sat down and calmed down. And he even apologized and said we'd figure it out. And I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What? You didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" he asked, still thinking the guy was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment. Because he was like, "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it. "Yo, just check. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking this social distancing thing real serious," and winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells the story, it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her and I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her that. Tell her. And don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said back, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I'd ever seen him. Even than a few seconds earlier, when I glanced through the people, his clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes bugged out of his head, white stuff caked on the corners of his mouth that I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking and just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch ass. Let her out, you bitch ass. Let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or a reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to even run or move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeve like he was prepared to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was so anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I'd missed all the signs leading up to this. All the opportunities to prevent it, that our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something I'd already begun to grapple with the day before. and had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do was scream. Not words, just "Ah!" and cover my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother would charge out the door, he's an athletic guy and I don't think he's ever actually been in a physical fight though, Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through, but there was an eerie moment of silence when nobody moved. I think I even stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood spurting out began when he started to pull his hand back through the glass. Things he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, "Look what you did to me! This is a test! I told you I couldn't be stopped, bitch ass!" And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of blood, which was always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize that this was real. And he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, call 911! While he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. I don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes, the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them his girlfriend was trapped in the house, and he'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain that he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of this whole event is, as they carted Wendell away for the arrest, he started singing his opera music again. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga, but most of all, Wendell, let's not meet. This event took place quite a few years ago, so unfortunately I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember nearly all of it. Anyways, this happened when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and it was on Easter Sunday. My family always gathers at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays, birthdays, etc. So, as we do every holiday, my mother and I started our hour-long trip to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all the city commotion, which explains the long drive. We were probably around 20 minutes away from our destination when my mom noticed that we were a little low on gas, so we decided to pull into this old, almost rustic-looking gas station, with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white with a few festive decorations outside and lots of Easter stickers on the 2 large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mom, having taught me not to talk to strangers nor open the car doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone as she went inside briefly to pay for the gas. She told me that she would be right back before going inside. It felt nice that day, so the windows in the car were down, so we could feel the breeze while driving instead of the AC. While I was waiting on my mom, I remember adjusting the colored paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out the backseat windows. When I looked over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 or 40 years old, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying. At this moment, I remember that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that my mom says I shouldn't speak to strangers. He replied then, "Well, we could be friends then. My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger, huh?" At the time, I thought he was right. In my mind, I thought since a stranger is someone you don't know, the man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew his name. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember. All I remember is him telling me that I had a nice Easter basket. At this point, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but being a child, I of course didn't know why. My mom then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thinks he was doing. The man seems to panic and he pulls my door handle violently. He quickly realized that it was locked, thankfully, and proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of the wrists in an attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull against him on instinct. This caused him to let go and take off running. My mom quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the car doors. She grabbed me and pulled me into an almost painful bear hug, and then inspected me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a slight bruise and redness on my arm where he grabbed me, but other than that, I was just shaken up. The reality of what just happened set in at the moment, and I remember just crying and holding onto my mom right after I said I was okay. I don't remember anything after this point, but I recently asked my mom about it, and she said that she called the police immediately after. To this day, my mom still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life, and claims that if she had gotten out there any later and came back to an empty car, she wouldn't have been able to live with herself. TLDR, a creepy man at a gas station convinced me that he wasn't a stranger, and then tries to yank me out of a car window. My mom got back from paying for the gas just in time. I recently learned of some chilling details about a person that was heavily involved in my life as a child, and I thought I would share the story. Throughout my childhood, I was extremely shy and did not find myself going out of my way to make friends in the new setting. I had recently started preschool at my grandmother's church, and I remember being on the playground playing by myself when a woman introduced herself to me. Her name was Candy, and she looked like any other sweet old woman. She almost reminded me of my own grandmother with her abundance of white curls on her head. Candy was a volunteer at the church and typically watched over the children while they played, so we would see each other fairly often. I can't remember much about the start of this friendship, but I presume one thing led to another before I was frequently spending time with her in and out of school. My parents were grateful to have someone who was interested in watching me, as I was the youngest of 3 and my parents worked full-time, while also having to take my brother and sister to and from school, sports, or friends' houses. So having a helping hand was a blessing for them. To be honest, I don't remember too many details about spending time with Candy, but I suppose we spent our time frequenting ice cream shops, parks, etc. I do have one memory of going to her house where I had never been before, and as she was showing me around, I remember passing through the dining room and seeing another girl who looked to be around 10 or 12 years old. Candy introduced me to her and told me that she lived down the street and would spend a lot of time at her house. I'm not sure why, but I remember being jealous. I guess I was jealous that Candy also cared for and spent time with another little girl. I'd never felt that way before, and I'm not sure why I remember that so clearly. For some reason, that was the only time I went to her house. Fast forward a few years, and I'm in 1st grade. I'd totally forgotten about Candy and had not seen her since I graduated preschool 2 years prior. My neighbors who I carpooled with to school had dropped me off at my house after school one day, and I spotted a Target grocery bag hooked to our front door. I wasn't sure what it could be or why my brother or sister didn't bring it inside when they arrived home from school an hour or so before me. Once I took it inside, I noticed writing on the bag indicating that there was a gift inside for me from Candy. I ran up the stairs to my room and, to my surprise, there were several adorable brand new outfits inside just for me. I immediately tried them on and was so excited to show my mom when she came home from work. After my mom got home, I eagerly showed her the new outfits that Candy had left for me. Unfortunately, my mom was not as excited as I was. In fact, she was quite angry. She yelled at me to take them off and that she would be returning them to Candy. I was so confused as to why she was upset with me. What did I do wrong? These were free clothes, a gift. Wouldn't it be rude to return a gift to someone? To avoid being punished, I put the clothes back in the bag and handed them to my mother. We never spoke of this again, and Candy slipped my mind for the next several years. A few years ago, my sister was home visiting from college. With nothing else to do, we decided to go to the Target to shop for useless things we didn't need. As we were walking through the parking lot, the thought of the Target bag from Candy randomly dawned on me. I proceeded to laugh and asked my sister if she remembered and if she knew why my mom was in such an awful mood that day to force me to give back the clothes back to Candy. My sister stopped dead in her tracks and said, Wait, do you not remember what Candy did to us? Taken aback, I shook my head and begged her to tell me what happened. She refused to talk about it and told me to ask my mom. Once again, the thought of Candy slipped my mind, and I didn't remember to ask my mother about what happened until I was in college a few years later. We were saying goodbye to my grandmother after grabbing some lunch when she mentioned to my mom that someone's funeral was that weekend. They then sat in silence for a few minutes just staring at each other. After my grandma left, I asked my mom who they were talking about, and she informed me about Candy's death. The realization that I had never heard the true stories about this woman crossed my mind, and I asked my mom about what my sister refused to speak on. My mother proceeded to relay the horrible stories to me about the little old woman that tried to take me away from my family. At the beginning of the friendship, Candy was genuinely a big help to my family and was someone that they trusted. However, Candy's intentions were questioned by my grandmother, who shared a few of her concerns with my father after hearing some odd stories from her friends at the church. She felt as though something was off with Candy, and she didn't like that I spent so much time with her. Coming from a woman who had never had a negative thing to say about anyone, my father became slightly wary of Candy, but he assumed my grandmother was just being overly cautious. After some time of Candy watching over and babysitting me, her demeanor changed, and she started acting possessive of me. She became hostile towards my parents. She would show up unannounced to our house asking for me, and if I wasn't there, she would become incredibly angry and yell at my parents about how awful they were. She would continuously tell them that they didn't deserve me and only she was worthy of taking care of me. This happened several times before my parents told her to stop coming to the house or they would call the police. This inclined her to start calling the house and leave messages for me, which my parents obviously would not tell me about. In these voicemails, she would cry to me and try to convince me to leave with her and leave my family. She would talk about how awful my parents were and how she could give me a much better life than they could. The voicemails that were intended for me soon turned to threats from my parents. She threatened to call the police or child services to have me removed from the home and placed into her care. She threatened to tell the police about my parents' violent abuse towards me and my siblings, none of which was true. Once she realized that her phone calls were not working, she began making efforts to show up at the house again. She started by driving up and down our street day after day. She would ask our neighbors and then the neighbors' children if anyone knew I was home or where I was. She would park her car and watch our house without anyone really noticing or saying anything. Eventually, our neighbors began recognizing her car and what was going on, and they would inform my parents when she came around asking about me. After some time of doing this, she took it upon herself to come to the front door while only my brother, who was likely 12 years old at the time, and I were home. And she started banging on the door begging to see me. My brother opened one of the front doors, keeping the storm door between them closed, and told her to leave. She proceeded to plead with him to let her in, and he replied that I was not home, despite me napping soundly upstairs. Cheers for smart 12-year-old brothers. Candy partially forced herself through the door when my brother put his hand in her face, pushing her out the door and told her that the police had been called. She left after that and distanced herself for a while before she encountered that final straw with my mother. One day, my mother and I were backing out of the driveway to attend a birthday party when Candy pulled in behind our car, blocking us from leaving. She came up to the window and my mother rolled it down, ready to tell her off for good. Candy ignored her and looked right past my mother into the back seat where I was sitting. She said to me, "Wouldn't you rather come with me and never see your mom again? I love you so much more than they ever did. I could give you everything you want if you come with me." This was the final straw for my mother. She never thought she would be upset or fight with an old woman. But the day had come when it was absolutely necessary. She screamed and yelled at her, making sure to include that Candy would regret the day that she ever came into contact with me or my family again. Something she said must have actually scared Candy because she drove off and didn't appear in our lives again, until the Target bag incident. I'm not sure how I never knew that any of this happened and never thought anything was weird about her when I was a child. but I guess my parents did a good job of shielding me from the horrors of his situation. After hearing about everything that took place, I assumed that there must have been a reason she became so obsessed with me. Did she not have her own family? Did she lose children or grandchildren and wanted to find someone to fill the void? According to my mother, she had several children that were much older than me, as well as young grandchildren. Thus, I'm not sure what would have sparked her interest in me. But thankfully we have no longer to worry about her. Part of me still wonders if I repressed any memories or conversations with her that were upsetting. But thankfully, we no longer have to worry about her. Part of me still wonders if I repressed any memories or conversations with her that were upsetting. Did she ever privately talk to me about how awful my parents were, or how she wanted to take me away from my family? Did I ever agree to leave with her? I also wonder if, as I grew older and joined social media like Facebook, did she ever search my name? Did she ever watch me when I was in middle school, high school, or even when I went away for college? I have so many questions, but I'm glad that we never had to find out if she was going to follow through on any of her threats. As a word of advice, always trust your grandmother's instincts about other grandmas. And do not befriend the little old woman volunteering on the playground. And finally, to the woman who made my parents' lives a living hell, let's not meet again.